The notification appeared just as I finished tying the last ribbon around a small gift bag. For a brief moment, I smiled. Each of my grandchildren was supposed to receive one of those bags the moment we arrived at the resort. Inside were tiny souvenirs I had spent months collecting. A seashell keychain, tropical chocolates, and handwritten notes, reminding them how deeply they were loved. 3 years of planning had led to this week. 3 years of saving every extra dollar. 3 years of imagining one unforgettable family vacation. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel before picking up my phone, expecting another message about flight times or luggage. Instead, I read words that made the room feel strangely silent. Mom, we've decided it would be better if this trip was just for our immediate family. We hope you understand. Since you've already taken care of the expenses, everything else is handled. I stared at the screen. Once. Twice. Then a third time, hoping I'd misunderstood. No. The words remained exactly the same. Not an invitation. Not an apology. Just a polite dismissal. I placed the phone on the table, without replying. Outside, rain tapped gently against the kitchen window. But inside the house, the silence was heavier than any storm. Across the room sat my packed suitcase. Inside were 2 dresses I had bought on clearance nearly a year ago, because I wanted something special for the beach. Tucked carefully between them was an old framed photograph of my late husband, Richard. The trip had never been just another vacation. It was meant to honor him. 40 years earlier, Richard and I had spent our honeymoon on those very islands. We couldn't afford luxury back then. We shared cheap meals, laughed through every inconvenience, and promised that one day we'd return with our family. He never got that chance. After he passed away, I quietly made myself another promise. One day, I would take our children and grandchildren there, so they could know the place where our happiest memories began. That dream became my purpose, after retirement. Every skipped restaurant meal, every overtime tutoring session, every item I sold online, every dollar found its way into one account, labeled simply, Family Vacation Fund. I never regretted the sacrifices. Until tonight. The phone vibrated again. This time it was my son. Please don't make this awkward. Emma thinks it'll be less stressful with fewer people. It's nothing personal. Nothing personal. Those 2 words hurt more than everything else. Because being quietly erased by your own child always feels personal. I looked around the kitchen. The colorful itinerary was still hanging on the refrigerator, with little magnets holding it in place. Monday, beach picnic. Tuesday, snorkeling. Wednesday, sunset dinner. Every activity had been planned around everyone else's preferences. My grandson loved sea turtles. My granddaughter wanted to learn surfing. Emma's mother struggled to walk long distances, so I had specifically requested accessible transportation. I had thought of everyone. Apparently, no one had thought of me. For the first time that evening, tears threatened to fall. But they never did. Instead, I walked slowly into my home office and switched on the old desk lamp. Its warm light filled the room as I opened my laptop. The banking page loaded automatically. There it was. The travel account. Still active. Still entirely under my name. I rested my hand on the mouse. One simple decision could change everything. But before I clicked anything, I wanted to know whether my family had truly forgotten me, or whether they believed I would quietly accept being left behind. The next morning, an unexpected email from the travel agency would reveal a detail they never intended for her to see, and it would change her decision forever. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. Not because I had somewhere to be, but because sleep had refused to stay with me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same message glowing on my phone. It wasn't just the rejection that haunted me. It was how casually it had been delivered. as though removing me from a dream I had spent years building, required nothing more than a few typed sentences. I wandered into the kitchen and brewed a cup of coffee. The house felt unusually large that morning, every room carrying memories of birthdays, Christmas mornings, and family dinners that suddenly felt much farther away than they really were. When my laptop chimed with a new email, I almost ignored it. The subject line caught my attention. Final travel confirmation. It had been sent automatically by the travel agency. Curious, I opened it. A complete itinerary appeared on the screen: flight numbers, hotel reservations, airport transfers, dinner bookings, and activity schedules. Everything I had carefully organized over the past 3 years was listed in perfect detail. I slowly scrolled through the passenger information. 8 names. My son, his wife, Emma, their children, Emma's parents, her younger brother, and his fiancée. I stopped scrolling. Surely there had to be another page. Maybe my reservation was listed separately. I searched again. Nothing. No ticket. No hotel registration. No airport transfer. No seat assignment. My name simply didn't exist. For several long seconds, I just stared at the screen. There had been no misunderstanding. No booking error. No last-minute accident. They had planned this from the beginning. I had been responsible for paying every invoice, yet somehow I had never been included in a single reservation. The realization settled quietly inside me. It wasn't heartbreak anymore. It was clarity. A few minutes later, my phone rang. Emma. I hesitated before answering. Good morning, she said cheerfully. We're almost done packing. Everything's going smoothly. Her voice sounded so normal that I almost questioned what I'd seen. I just wanted to ask, I replied calmly. Is there anything you'd like me to bring for the children? Maybe some travel games or snacks? There was a brief pause. Then she laughed softly. Oh, don't worry about that. We've got everything covered. Everything. The word lingered in my mind. She didn't ask when I was leaving. She didn't ask if I was excited. She didn't even pretend I was coming. Instead, she added, honestly, this week might be a good chance for you to relax at home. Relax. As if staying behind had been my idea all along. After ending the call, I walked into my study and unlocked the small fireproof box where I kept important documents. Inside were years of paperwork connected to the vacation fund. I reviewed each page carefully. One detail stood out immediately. Primary account holder, Eleanor Brooks. Authorized users, none. No joint owner. No shared authority. No secondary access. Every reservation. Every payment. Every dollar. Legally. Belonged to me. For the first time since receiving my son's message, I didn't feel like crying. Instead, I opened my banking app and stared at one option I had never imagined using. Manage linked payments. My finger hovered above the screen. One tap could stop every future transaction connected to the trip. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for one reason. Just one. To believe they still saw me as family. That afternoon, she decides to give her son one final opportunity to tell the truth. But his response will make the next decision easier than either of them could have imagined. I didn't touch the banking app. Instead, I closed my phone and carried it into the living room, where an old photo album rested on the coffee table. Dust had settled on its cover, but the memories inside remained as vivid as ever. There was my son at 6 years old, grinning with 2 missing front teeth after losing them at school. Another photo showed him wrapped in a superhero blanket, insisting he would protect me from all the bad guys. Back then, he never let go of my hand when we crossed the street. I traced the edge of the photograph with my finger and whispered, "What happened to that little boy?" The question echoed through the empty room. By noon, I had made up my mind. If there was even the smallest chance that this had all been a misunderstanding, I wanted to give my son the opportunity to clear it up. I didn't want to make a life-changing decision based on assumptions. I opened my phone and typed a simple message. "Hi, sweetheart, just checking in. You need any help before your trip? I can still bring the kids travel pillows or pack some extra snacks if that would make things easier." I stared at the screen for a moment before pressing send. The message was delivered instantly. Now, all I had to do was wait. An hour passed. Then another. I busied myself folding laundry that didn't need folding and watering flowers that had already been watered that morning. Finally, my phone lit up. My heart skipped. It wasn't a reply. It was a read receipt. He had seen my message, but he chose not to answer. I told myself he was probably busy packing. Maybe he'd call later. Maybe he was distracted. To keep my mind occupied, I opened social media. Almost immediately, Emma's latest post appeared at the top of my screen. A smiling family selfie. Suitcases lined up by the front door. The caption read, "Vacation mode. Can't wait to spend quality time with the people who matter most." Hundreds of likes. Dozens of comments. I searched the picture instinctively. 8 smiling faces. Not one empty space waiting for me. Not one comment thanking the person who had paid for the trip. I quietly locked my phone. For the first time, I realized I had been holding on to hope while everyone else had already moved on. Late that evening, another notification appeared. This time it was my son. Relief washed over me as I opened the message. "Sorry, Mom. Been really busy. Everything's under control. You don't have to worry about anything." That was it. No apology. No explanation. No invitation. Just another reminder that my role had already been decided. I looked at the banking application, still open on my laptop. The option to pause every payment remained exactly where I'd left it. I slowly reached for the mouse. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I finally understood something. People who truly value you never expect you to finance a celebration they don't want you to attend. My finger rested above the button. This time, I wasn't hesitating. As departure day arrives, Alina makes a quiet decision that no one at the airport sees coming. Within hours, her phone will be flooded with desperate calls, and the family who left her behind will discover that trust, once broken, has a very real price. That night, I sat alone in my study, staring at the laptop screen. The cursor blinked beside the words, "Manage linked payments." Just a few hours earlier, I had promised myself that I wouldn't act out of anger. If I made a decision tonight, it had to come from self-respect, not revenge. So I closed my eyes and thought about Richard. My husband always had a way of calming me whenever life became complicated. I could almost hear him saying, "Ellie, never let people mistake your kindness for weakness." I smiled sadly. "I wish you were here," I whispered. If he had been sitting beside me, he probably wouldn't have told me what to do. Instead, he would have asked me a simple question. If someone treated our grandchildren this way one day, what advice would you give them? The answer came instantly. I would tell them never to allow anyone to use their generosity while making them feel invisible. Why should I expect less for myself? I opened my eyes and looked around the room. Every corner of this house carried memories of sacrifices I had made for my family. I had worked 2 jobs after Richard passed away. I had skipped vacations, postponed replacing my old car, and even sold some of my jewelry so my son could finish college without student loans. Not once had I reminded him of those sacrifices. Because that's what parents do. We give without keeping score. But there is a difference between giving out of love and allowing yourself to be taken for granted. I reached for my phone one last time. No new messages. No missed calls. No one asking where I was. no one wondering why I hadn't packed my bags. That silence answered every question I still had. With a slow breath, I returned my attention to the banking portal. A confirmation window appeared. Are you sure you want to remove funding authorization for these travel reservations? I read the sentence 3 times. Then, without rushing, I clicked yes. The screen refreshed. Within seconds, every scheduled payment connected to the vacation changed its status. Authorization revoked. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. Mostly, I felt peaceful. For the first time in days, the weight on my chest seemed lighter. I shut the laptop, made myself a cup of chamomile tea, and carried it to the back porch. The evening breeze was cool, and the sky was filled with stars. I realized something surprising. The trip I'd dreamed about wasn't ruined. Only the people I had imagined sharing it with had changed. As I looked up at the night sky, my phone buzzed on the table beside me. One message, then another, then 3 more in rapid succession. I picked it up. The first notification came from the travel agency. The second was from my bank. But it was the third notification, the one with my son's name on it, that made my heart skip. His message contained only 4 words. Mom, please call me. Something had happened, and judging by the flood of missed calls that followed, they had finally discovered exactly what I had done. The next morning, while my family stood helpless at the airport check-in counter, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I wanted to answer. The next morning, I woke up feeling strangely calm. For the first time in days, my heart wasn't racing. I made myself breakfast, watered the flowers on my porch, and watched the sunrise paint the sky shades of orange and gold. It was the exact morning I had imagined spending at the airport with my family. Instead, I was home. At exactly 8:17 a.m., my phone started ringing. My son's name flashed across the screen. I looked at it for a few seconds before setting it back on the table. It stopped. Then it rang again. And again. By the 5th call, I knew something had gone terribly wrong. A minute later, my phone buzzed with a text message. Mom, please answer, it's urgent. I didn't respond. Another message arrived almost instantly. The hotel canceled our reservations. The airline says the payment authorization was removed. What happened? I took a slow sip of my coffee before locking my phone. After everything that had happened, I deserved at least a few moments to think before answering. Nearly 20 minutes later, I finally picked up when he called again. Mom, he shouted the second I answered. Where have you been? We've been trying to reach you. I remained quiet for a moment. I was having breakfast, I said calmly. You don't understand. We're standing at the airport. The airline says the reservations aren't valid anymore, and the hotel won't release our rooms because the payments were canceled. I know, I replied softly. There was complete silence. Then he asked, You knew about this? Yes. His voice grew sharper. Did you do this? I looked out the window at the roses blooming beside my porch. I did. What were you thinking? He snapped. The kids are crying. Emma's parents are furious. Everyone is waiting because of this. I let him finish before asking the one question that had been sitting in my heart for days. When were you planning to tell me I wasn't invited? Silence. Not the kind where someone is searching for the right words. The kind where the truth has nowhere left to hide. Finally, he spoke. Mom, that's not what this is. Really? I asked quietly. Then, why wasn't my name on a single reservation? Why did the travel agency send me an itinerary with everyone else's ticket, except mine? He didn't answer. Instead, I heard muffled voices in the background. Someone asked, Is she fixing it? Another voice, I recognized Emma's, said, Tell her we're going to miss our flight. I closed my eyes. Even now, No one was asking how I felt. No one was apologizing. They only wanted the vacation back. My son lowered his voice. "Mom, can we please discuss this later? Just restore the payments first." I took a deep breath. "No," I answered. For the first time in years, I chose myself. My son thought refusing to restore the payments was the cruelest thing I could do. But he had no idea that I had already made another decision, one that would change my life forever, while forcing my family to face the consequences of their own choices. After I ended the call, I placed my phone face down on the kitchen table. For a long time, I simply sat there, listening to the ticking of the old wall clock. It was amazing how quiet my house felt compared to the chaos I had just heard through the phone. About half an hour later, it rang again. This time, I answered before the second ring. My son's voice was completely different. He wasn't angry anymore. He sounded exhausted. "Mom," he said quietly, "can we just talk?" "I've been ready to talk for days," I replied. "You just didn't think I deserved the truth." There was another long silence. Finally, he sighed. "Emma thought it would be easier if the trip was just our household and her family." I didn't interrupt. She said adding too many people would make everything stressful. Her parents wanted a quiet vacation, and his voice trailed off. "And you agreed," I finished for him. "I didn't know how to tell you." I closed my eyes for a moment. "No," I said softly. "You knew exactly how to tell me. You just hoped you wouldn't have to." He didn't deny it. Instead, he whispered, "I never thought it would turn out like this." I looked at the framed photo of Richard, sitting on the bookshelf across the room. Neither did I. Just then, I heard another voice in the background. "Emma." She wasn't speaking to me. She was speaking to my son. But she didn't realize I could hear every word. "Ask her to fix it," she said impatiently. "We can sort everything else out later." Those words hurt more than I expected. Not because she wanted the trip back, but because, even now, the problem wasn't how they had treated me. The problem was that their vacation had fallen apart. My son lowered his voice. "Mom, Emma wants to apologize." I waited. A few seconds later, Emma came on the line. "Hi," she began awkwardly. "I'm sorry you're upset." Upset. That was the word she chose. Not sorry for excluding me. Not sorry for hiding the truth. Just sorry that I was upset. I took a slow breath before answering. "Emma, do you know what hurts the most?" She didn't respond. "It isn't that you wanted a different vacation. People are allowed to make their own plans." I paused. "It's that you smiled at me while I paid every bill, knowing I wasn't even invited." The line went completely silent. For the first time since all of this began, neither of them had an excuse. Only silence. Then, just before ending the call, I heard a small voice in the background. "Mom, why isn't Grandma coming with us?" It was my youngest grandson. The innocence in his question stopped everyone from speaking, because the one thing they had tried hardest to hide was finally being heard by the people they never wanted to know the truth. As my grandson kept asking where I was, the adults struggled to answer. They could lie to me, but explaining the truth to a child would prove far more difficult than any of them had imagined. After I hung up the phone, I couldn't stop thinking about my grandson's question. Why isn't Grandma coming with us? It was such a simple question. Yet no one had been able to answer it. Children have a way of exposing truths that adults spend months trying to hide. About an hour later, my phone rang again. This time it wasn't my son. It was my oldest granddaughter, Lily. I smiled the moment I saw her name. She rarely called unless she wanted to tell me about school or one of the books she had been reading. I answered immediately. "Hi, sweetheart." "Grandma," she said softly. "Dad said you're staying home because you didn't want to travel." I closed my eyes. So that's what they told you. There was a pause. I didn't believe it, she admitted. You've been talking about this trip forever. A lump formed in my throat. She remembered. Even after all these years, she remembered how excited I had been. I took a slow breath before speaking. Lily, can I tell you a little story? Of course. I started saving for this vacation 3 years ago. Every month, I put aside a little money. Sometimes it meant saying no to things I wanted. I wore the same winter coat for 4 years. I skipped dinners out with friends. I even sold a few pieces of jewelry that your grandpa gave me many years ago. She didn't interrupt. I wasn't saving for myself, I continued. I was saving because I wanted all of us to make memories together. I wanted you and your brother to see the beach where your grandpa and I spent our honeymoon. That place meant everything to us. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I heard her sniffle. You sold Grandpa's gifts. Only a few, I answered gently. He would have wanted those memories to be worth more than the jewelry. Her voice became quiet. Grandma, I didn't know any of this. That's because I never wanted you to feel like you owed me anything. Just then, I heard another small voice in the background. It was my grandson. Lily, is that Grandma? Can I talk to her? A few moments later, he came on the phone. Grandma? Yes, sweetheart. Were you really coming with us? I smiled sadly. I thought I was. He became unusually quiet. Then he asked the one question I never expected. Then, why didn't Mom and Dad save you a seat? I had no answer. Because some questions don't have easy explanations. Only uncomfortable truths. As I ended the call, I realized something had changed. For the first time, the children weren't hearing my son's version of the story. They were hearing mine. And once the truth reached their hearts, nothing in our family would ever be quite the same again. That evening, there was an unexpected knock at my front door. I wasn't expecting visitors, but standing on my porch was someone who knew exactly how much I had sacrificed. And they were about to reveal a secret my son had kept from me for years. I sat quietly after ending the call with my grandchildren. Their questions stayed with me long after the phone went silent. Children don't judge the way adults do. They don't look for excuses or clever explanations. They simply ask what feels true to them. And the truth was becoming impossible for my family to hide. As evening settled in, I made myself a cup of tea and wrapped a light sweater around my shoulders. I had just settled into my favorite chair when I heard a knock at the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, I found my neighbor Margaret, standing there with a small casserole dish covered in foil. I made too much for dinner, she said with a warm smile. Thought you might help me finish it. I couldn't help but smile back. Margaret had lived next door for almost 15 years. She had lost her husband around the same time I lost Richard. And somehow, we had become each other's quiet support system. She looked at my face for a moment before asking softly, Something's happened, hasn't it? I invited her inside. We sat at the kitchen table, and for the first time since all of this began, I told someone everything. I told her about the messages, the canceled invitation, the airport calls, the silence. When I finished, Margaret reached across the table and gently squeezed my hand. You know what I find most heartbreaking? She asked. I shook my head. You still keep looking for reasons to blame yourself. Her words caught me off guard. I've been wondering if I should have handled it differently, I admitted. Maybe I should have just let them go. Margaret smiled kindly. Alina, paying for a vacation doesn't buy you love. But neither does pretending that being mistreated is acceptable. I looked down at my hands. She was right. For years, I had confused sacrifice with responsibility. I thought that if I gave enough, loved enough, and forgave enough, everyone around me would naturally do the same. Life doesn't always work that way. Before leaving, Margaret reached into her purse and handed me a folded brochure. "I picked this up yesterday," she said. It was an advertisement for a small seaside resort a few hours away. Quiet beaches, ocean view rooms, a weekend package designed for solo travelers and retirees. "I thought of you when I saw it," she said. "Maybe it's time you made some memories for yourself." After she left, I sat staring at the brochure for several minutes. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I wasn't thinking about the vacation I had lost. I was thinking about the one I could still have. Maybe honoring Richard's memory didn't depend on who came with me. Maybe it depended on whether I finally allowed myself to heal. As I reached for my laptop to look at the resort's website, my phone lit up again. It was my son. But this time, he wasn't calling to ask for the vacation back. His text contained just one sentence. "Mom, the kids know everything now, and they're asking questions I don't know how to answer." I read it twice. Then I quietly closed my phone. Because for once, the answers weren't mine to give. The next morning, I made a decision that surprised even me. While my son struggled to repair the damage at home, I packed a suitcase, not for the family vacation I had lost, but for a journey that would remind me who I was before I spent years putting everyone else first. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. For the first time in weeks, I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't want to read another apology that wasn't really an apology, or another message asking me to fix a problem someone else had created. Instead, I opened the curtains. The morning sun spilled into my bedroom, warming the floor beneath my feet. I stood there for a moment, listening to the birds outside my window. It reminded me that life keeps moving, whether our hearts are ready or not. After breakfast, I picked up the brochure Margaret had given me the night before. I studied the photographs again: quiet beaches, walking trails along the shoreline, small cottages overlooking the ocean. It wasn't the destination Richard and I had dreamed about. But maybe that wasn't the point anymore. I picked up the phone and called the resort. A cheerful woman answered, and within 20 minutes, I had booked a 4-day stay for the following week. When she asked, "Will anyone be joining you?" I smiled. "No," I replied. "This trip is just for me." Those words felt unfamiliar. For most of my life, every decision I made revolved around someone else. My husband, my son, my grandchildren. I couldn't remember the last time I had chosen something simply because it would make me happy. After confirming the reservation, I walked into my bedroom and pulled my old suitcase out of the closet. It was the same suitcase I had packed for the family vacation. This time, unpacking it didn't make me sad. It felt like a fresh beginning. I folded my favorite blue sweater inside, added a novel I had been meaning to read for months, and tucked Richard's photograph into the side pocket. He was still coming with me, just in a different way than I had imagined. That afternoon, my phone buzzed several times. My son had sent 3 messages. "Mom, can we please talk?" The kids won't stop asking questions. I know I made a mistake. I read every message. Then, I placed the phone back on the table, without replying. Some conversations require time, and some apologies need more than words. Later that evening, Lily called again. "Grandma," she asked excitedly, "Dad said you're taking your own vacation." "I am." There was a short pause before she giggled. "I think that's kind of awesome." I laughed for the first time in what felt like forever. "So do I." Before hanging up, she said something that stayed with me all night. "When you come back, will you tell me all about it? Maybe one day we can go there together." Tears filled my eyes. Not because I was hurt, but because hope had quietly returned. Maybe I hadn't lost my family completely. Maybe I had simply discovered which relationships were built on genuine love, and which ones needed time to heal. As I zipped up my suitcase, my phone rang one more time. This time, it wasn't my son. It was Emma. And somehow, I knew this call would be very different from the last one. When I answered Emma's call, I expected another excuse. Instead, I heard something I never thought she would say, and it forced me to question whether people really can change after making a painful mistake. I looked at Emma's name on my phone for several seconds before answering. A week earlier, I probably would have ignored the call, but something inside me had changed. I wasn't answering because I was ready to forgive. I was answering because I wanted to hear the truth. "Hello," I said quietly. For a few moments, all I could hear was her breathing. Then she spoke. "Alina, I don't know where to begin." It was the first time in years she had called me by my name instead of Mom. Oddly enough, it made the conversation feel more honest. "You can begin with the truth," I replied. She took a shaky breath. "I owe you an apology. A real one." I remained silent, letting her continue. "I was selfish," she admitted. "When we started planning the trip, I kept thinking about what would make the vacation easier for me. My parents wanted time with the grandchildren, and I convinced myself that having one less person would make everything simpler." I listened without interrupting. "I never stopped to think about what the trip meant to you." Those words struck me harder than I expected. Not because they erased the pain, but because they acknowledged it. She continued, her voice trembling. "When the children found out you weren't invited, they were devastated. Lily wouldn't speak to me all evening. Your grandson asked why we could accept your money, but not your company." I closed my eyes. Children often understand fairness better than adults. Emma let out a quiet sigh. "I realized something that night." "What was that?" I asked. "We didn't cancel your vacation." She paused. "We canceled your place in the family." The words hung between us. Painful, honest, impossible to ignore. "I'm ashamed of that," she whispered. For the first time since this all began, I believed she truly meant what she was saying. Not because she was crying, not because the trip had fallen apart, but because she had finally named the wound she had caused. After a long silence, I spoke. "Emma, forgiveness isn't something I can offer simply because someone asks for it. I know. It takes time to rebuild trust. I understand. And trust isn't rebuilt with promises." She answered softly. "It's rebuilt with actions." A faint smile crossed my face. Yes. For the first time, she understood. Before ending the call, she said something unexpected. "I told your son that when you're ready, we'll come to your house. Not to ask for anything, not to convince you of anything, just to listen." I thanked her quietly and hung up. As I set my phone down, I noticed Richard's photograph on the bookshelf. I smiled at it. "I think they finally understand," I whispered. But understanding was only the beginning. People can regret their choices. They can even admit they were wrong. The real question is whether they are willing to change. The next afternoon, while I was finishing packing for my own trip, I heard a familiar sound outside. A car pulled into my driveway. I looked through the front window. My son stepped out first. Behind him came Emma, and holding flowers in their hands were my 2 grandchildren. None of them had called ahead. None of them had sent a message. They had simply come. I took a slow breath as they walked toward my front door. Some visits change nothing. But somehow, I knew this one was about to change everything. As I opened the front door, my grandson wrapped his arms around me before anyone could say a word. Then, he asked one heartfelt question that brought every adult standing on my porch to tears. When I opened the front door, no one spoke. Before my son or Emma could say a single word, my youngest grandson ran straight toward me and wrapped his little arms around my waist. He held on so tightly that I could barely move. I gently placed my hand on his back, and for a moment, Everything else disappeared. Then he looked up at me with tears in his eyes and asked the one question no adult had been brave enough to ask. "Grandma, are you still part of our family?" My heart broke. I knelt down until we were eye level and held both of his little hands. "My sweet boy," I whispered, "nothing could ever stop me from being your grandma. I have loved you since before you were even born, and I always will." He smiled through his tears and hugged me again. When I stood up, I invited everyone inside. We gathered around the same dining table where our family had celebrated birthdays, holidays, and countless Sunday dinners. This time, however, there was no laughter, only honesty. My son spoke first. "Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me today." I nodded. "That's a good place to start." He lowered his eyes. I kept telling myself I was avoiding conflict. The truth is, I was avoiding responsibility. It was easier to disappoint you than to stand up for you. His words were painful to hear, but they were honest. Emma looked at me next. "I've spent the last few days thinking about the example we set for the children." She glanced toward Lily and her younger brother. "We told them that kindness matters, that family comes first. Then we did the exact opposite." Neither of us tried to interrupt her. She continued quietly. "I can't change what I did, but I want to spend the rest of my life making sure I never treat you that way again." I appreciated her sincerity. Still, I knew something important needed to be said. "I want both of you to understand something," I began. "This wasn't really about a vacation." They listened carefully. It was about being included, about feeling respected. If you had simply come to me and said, "We'd like to take a different trip this year," I might have been disappointed. I paused before continuing. "But I would have understood. What hurt wasn't your decision. It was the deception." The room became completely silent. Even the children seemed to understand. Lily reached across the table and took my hand. "Grandma," she said softly, "next time, can we make memories together?" Tears filled my eyes. "I'd like that very much." As the afternoon came to an end, my son handed me a small envelope. "I know this doesn't fix anything," he said, "but I hope you'll read it after we leave." I waited until they had driven away before opening it. Inside wasn't a letter. It was something I never expected to see. A printed travel itinerary. But this one looked completely different from the first. At the top, in bold letters, was my name. And underneath it, every member of my family. I thought the new itinerary meant everything had finally been repaired. But when I turned over the last page, I found a handwritten note from my son that revealed the real surprise. And it brought me to tears before I even finished reading it. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the new itinerary in my hands. This time, my name wasn't missing. It was printed right at the top. Eleanor Brooks. For the first time in weeks, I felt seen. I slowly turned over the last page and unfolded the handwritten note tucked inside. It was from my son. "Mom, I know I can't erase what happened. I broke your trust, and I hurt someone who spent her entire life putting me first. I don't expect forgiveness because I wrote this letter. I hope to earn it by the way I treat you from now on. If you ever decide to travel with us again, this trip will be your choice. You pick the destination. You pick the dates. We'll simply be grateful to come with you." By the time I reached the last sentence, my eyes were filled with tears. Not because the pain had disappeared, but because, for the first time, I felt that my son truly understood what he had almost lost. I carefully folded the letter and placed it inside Richard's old photo album. It belonged there. A reminder that even broken relationships can begin to heal when pride gives way to honesty. A week later, I still went on the seaside trip I had booked for myself. And I'm glad I did. Every morning, I walked along the shore with a cup of coffee in my hand, listening to the waves instead of worrying about everyone else's happiness. I watched the sunrise. I finished the novel that had been sitting on my bookshelf for months. I even laughed with strangers over dinner, something I hadn't done in years. Somewhere between those quiet walks and peaceful evenings, I realized something important. I hadn't lost myself overnight. I had given little pieces of myself away over many years, believing that love meant always coming last. It doesn't. Real love doesn't ask you to disappear. When I returned home, my family was waiting for me. Not because they needed money. Not because they wanted another vacation. They simply wanted to spend time together. We cooked dinner as a family. The grandchildren filled the house with laughter. My son quietly repaired the loose step on my front porch, without me asking. Emma helped organize old family photographs, and asked me to tell the children the stories behind each one. No one rushed me. No one interrupted. They listened. Months later, we planned another family trip. This time, everyone gathered around my dining table before a single reservation was made. My grandson smiled and said, "Grandma, where are we going?" That one little word, "we," it meant more than any luxury resort ever could. As I looked around the table, I silently thanked Richard. The vacation we had dreamed about all those years ago had finally come true. Not because we reached a beautiful destination, but because, at last, we remembered what family was supposed to feel like. And if there's one lesson my journey taught me, it's this. Never confuse kindness with obligation. Give from love, not from fear of being forgotten. The people who truly cherish you will never make you earn your place in their lives. Because family isn't measured by who pays the bill. It's measured by who makes sure you always have a seat at the table. If this story touched your heart, take a moment today to call your parents or grandparents and let them know how much they mean to you. Sometimes, the people who love us the most ask for the least, yet they deserve the most. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next heartfelt story. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Share your answer in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourself, take care of your loved ones, and I'll see you in the next story.